Hi, and welcome to another episode of WCM's Outdoor Hospitality Update. I'm Ben Quiggle, editor of Woodall's Campground magazine, and of course, my esteemed co host, Mike Gast,
Hey,
former
everybody.
vice president of communications at Campgrounds of America, and he writes for RV Travel now. I saw an article in Glamping Business Americas that you wrote on Timberline, which we had on this past fall. And so you're just all around
Everywhere,
from your
everywhere.
base in Hawaii. So it's always great to see your name pop up in articles. That Timberline article was really good. So if anybody wants to check out his that article, it's a really good one. So that's a unique couple and what they're doing there.
hmm
And our guest is Mia Johnson, founder of Northeast Campground Brokers. Correct? You founded the
Correct.
company, yeah,
Yes.
and you help people sell and buy parks. I guess. What? Just explain to us, how the company got started and what you do.
Well, I started the company about 11 years ago. Before that, I was with another company for a couple of years. Uh, Northeast Campground Brokers exclusively sells campgrounds and RV parks, mostly on sell side, occasionally on buy side. Do a little bit of consulting, but it's been a very, very busy selling time in the last few years, so it's been pretty great. It's an exciting time for our industry. Um, my background is also I'm a corporate lawyer, so I had some experience doing a lot of deals over the years before I became a business broker and a campground broker. But now my company is all I do. The Northeast Campground Brokers is 100% of the time. I am no longer an attorney. I retired a few months back, and hopefully we'll never look back. I'm excited. This industry has a lot to offer and is continuing to grow. So it really is a great time for campground owners and operators.
So I guess before we get into the really pressing questions, I'm a Law and Order fan. So how much of Law and Order is accurate when you're a lawyer?
Oh,
Did you ever get to yell objection?
no, but my husband did. Not only is my husband an attorney, he's also a detective. So
Okay.
he always would tell me about 20% of that is real.
Okay.
Well, feel free to yell objection to any of Ben's questions today.
So I think I forget who said it, but they said that Law and Order ruined a whole generation of lawyers. But I think I was
Yeah,
working on
you push the DNA button and it comes back like that. It doesn't quite work that way.
it. But anyways, I mean the development and just the real estate market is extremely hot right now in the outdoor hospitality industry. We ran an article a few weeks ago talking with a couple of other brokers, and it's just amazing what's going on in the market. I guess, I have to imagine you're staying pretty busy.
It's the last several years have been crazy, but last year was absolutely insane. So a lot of factors go into demand, right? So we see our camper market, it's been the COVID bump, it has been great. But even before that, we've seen year over year growth since 2010. So we've been doing this for many years. And back then, valuations were based on real estate value. Not anymore, it's based on cash flow. So as our numbers grow in this industry, so do our values. But during COVID, I think it really introduced our industry to so many investors and other individuals who never really looked at the campground market as a viable business option or as an investment option. And then we got so much press because of COVID. I think it really did introduce a whole new group of buyers. So now we've got a situation where there's not that much on the market, and we have probably 2 to 3 times as many buyers as there used to be. So the demand is so high. With interest rates, historically, we'll talk about that in a few minutes, interest rates have been low, the market has been strong, and our numbers are up. So everybody's numbers and values are continuing to rise. So it's been a great time to sell. It still is, but I think we're reaching the end of that hot sellers market for a lot of reasons. And, I don't know how much you want me to start
So-
jumping into that, or if you want to ask questions.
Well, Mia, give me a little bit better idea of the scope of your company. How big have you been adding people like crazy the last 2 years as far as the
I
staff?
actually haven't, and the reason that I personally haven't is, it was hard during COVID too, because basically everything I do is out of my home now, and then I'm on the road, and so I've had a lot of people who are inquiring to join, but it also takes time to add people, and it was time, frankly, I just haven't had. So it's really my company is basically my husband and I do all of the work, and I also I want to give that personal service to my clients, rather than giving it to another broker or another staff member to provide. So we basically are the company. Now, could I have added 5 more people in the last year? Absolutely. Some days I wish I had, but it would have just been time that I didn't have to train, etc.
Yeah, I think, I've spoken with quite a few owners that are going through the sale process, or they're thinking about selling, or, they've gotten approached by people. I mean, there's a lot of cold calls going on right now, I think, where people all of a sudden, hey, we'd love to buy your campground, and they haven't even really thought about it. I guess, how do you work with campground owners that maybe haven't even really thought about listing their park, and all of a sudden opportunity pops up? I guess, what's that process like?
Well, I actually go around to a lot of the shows giving seminars on on how to sell, what to do to prepare. I get that question a lot from my owner operator sellers. It's really important to prepare because you can maximize your value, but more importantly, you need to know how much you're worth. I have had so many people over the years who've reached out to me who might have seen me at one of the shows, and they called me up and said, I just got this unsolicited offer for X dollars. And I said, well, I really need to understand what your numbers are so I can give you a true value. And then I can honestly assess if they're in the right ballpark. And time again, I look at the number and I'm like, do not sell it. You are undervaluing it. And that's exactly why these people are contacting you directly. They don't want you to know what your campground is really worth. They want to cut out people like me or other consultants or other brokers, etc., because they're a buyer. So their job is to get it for the lowest number. My job as a seller's broker is to get it for the highest number. So it's always the first thing. It's most important to find out what you truly are worth. So if you get an unsolicited offer, reach out to somebody like me. There's I shouldn't say lots. There's a handful of specialty brokers across the country that do this in your region. Or even if they're not in your region, most of us will still help you and point you in the right direction of what a true value is.
So Mia,
Yep.
we used to, again, back in KOA days, 20 years ago, it was always a very simple formula. It was the times 10 annual net to try to come up with a value of that. But that's kind of gone out the window when you've got these large corporations, these large organizations of investors coming in and just dropping these huge numbers on some of these smaller campgrounds that may have undeveloped land that they're really after. Can you tell us in a nutshell, how do you go into a specific property and know you have to do something different to come up with a true valuation?
Well, we still do use a cash flow methodology. It's not so much based on the number of sites like it was a decade ago, because that was based on a real estate valuation. Today, it's truly a cash flow value. So we're still using that multiple of cash flow, but the multiple has gone up a lot. So instead of 10 times cash flow, which is what we had for, say, at least a decade until 2021. In 2021, the multiple went up significantly. So now instead of 10 times, it's more like 12 times or close to it, 11 and a half times cash flow, depending on the size of the campground, of course. Now, the much larger the park, the much higher the multiple. So if you are a typical owner operator size park, it's usually around 11 or 12 times cash flow. But if you're a 400 site park, it might be, 14 times cash flow. Just depends again on the size of the park and the gross revenue. But then there are other factors. So that's just the typical campground that has certain number of sites developed. If the campground is in a premium area, if it has lots of acreage for expansion, you might be able to squeeze out a little bit more. But that number is very hard to determine. It's not a formula, right? So what often ends up happening in those situations is the market's going to tell us where we're at. And I'll put it out there. And if it's a larger park, I'll get, 3 or 5 offers, and it'll often go higher than ask. And that subjective portion of the value, it's very hard to determine what that is without truly getting it out there. Another reason why you don't want to take that unsolicited offer that is a cold call, because you want to get multiple offers. In this market, you can get multiple offers usually, and that will drive your price up.
I know in the case of KOA, we always had, through the franchise contract, that right of first refusal, that we could go back in and match or beat an existing offer. Does that get in the way now? Is that something that brokers have to deal with constantly? Is that right of first refusal for franchisors?
It does get in the way. However, my experience with KOA is they've been excellent with respect to giving an answer to the owner, the franchisee, very quickly. I think I don't remember, but it might be a 30-day right of first refusal, right? My experience is they have been back within a few days, and they have given the yes or the no very, very quickly. So that doesn't become as big of an issue. And most of the investors out there do understand that is part of a KOA purchase. It might be a little bit more difficult for the owner-operator buyers, because more emotion goes into that owner-operator buying it. And when they set their heart on a specific campground and then they have to wait, it's a very nerve-wracking process for them. But again, my experience has been KOA has been very good about giving an answer very quickly.
What I guess what, when I speak with owners at conferences, and I've sat in some of these sessions, I guess they always mention some of the smaller things they do to get their park ready to sell. I guess, what are some of the things where you're like, why are you doing this, to sell your park, or things you wish campground owners knew before they went to sell their park, I guess?
Couple of things that I tell people over and over again. You've got to get your books and records in order right away. The cleaner and neater your records are, the more confidence the buyer is going to have, which is ultimately going to help get your value up. Maybe not your initial value, but through the process, if they lose confidence, they're going to withdraw their offer, and it's going to basically lower your other offers. So you want to have everything in order. You want to make sure that if you have 150 sites, you're permitted for 150 sites. If you didn't actually get approvals for those last 20 that you put in a couple of years ago, you better go and do that, because when the bank and the appraiser and everybody comes in and looks at the value, if you're using those extra 20 sites that weren't permitted, you can't use those in your numbers. If you can't put them in your revenue, it's going to lower your value. Again, not a real estate value. It's a cash flow value. It's a business value. So that's really important. Making improvements. Everybody said, oh, well, I should do this and that. Nope, you shouldn't. Unless you plan on holding it for long enough for that improvement to make sense. So if you're going to add cabins, that's a great way to grow your revenue, right? If you're going to spend $100,000 this year on cabins, well, when are you going to get the cabin? You're going to buy it now. They're on 6 to 12 month backlog, right? So let's say you get it in by the end of this year. Well, your numbers aren't going to look different until the end of next year. So your value is not going to increase until the end of next year. So if you plan on holding for a few years, there are certain revenue boosting improvements that you always should make. Add a gate, add rentals, do more marketing, get a better website, get out there and work a little bit harder and bringing your numbers up. But you have to hold it long enough for it to matter.
But we're not talking about deferred maintenance. I know that was always an issue in the campground business that I was in, because at the lifespan of a owner operator was they got tired at those last few years, and things, or they had other needs for the cash because kids going to college, whatever that was, and all of a sudden they started to defer maintenance, and that could really hurt a sale. Correct?
Absolutely. So the deferred maintenance piece, we're not necessarily talking about a couple buildings need paint, right? Those are minor, but sometimes we have some major, electrical or septic issues that can be significant, and they haven't been touched in years and years and years. And things are really, not looking so great, and they do need to be updated or upgraded or just repaired because they're not operating. When I do evaluation, it's assuming that everything is in good condition, not excellent and not fair or poor, but good working operating condition. Most of these campgrounds have been around for years and years. So we have to expect that every year there's always something that breaks, right? We get that. But what you're talking about, Mike, is more than just every year the repairs that we make. It's the thing that we've been putting off for years that we knew we needed to do. The roof that's going to cost us $25,000 that's now leaking. That's a bad issue, because a new owner, especially an owner operator, if they just put their life savings into their down payment, they can't afford another $50,000 for this repair. So we end up taking a hit on the purchase price, or often having to give a credit or something like that at closing to get these buyers in.
So I'm assuming that for a lot of the first years you were in business, you were dealing with owner operator selling to another owner operator. I'm sure that has changed a lot with this influx of new money. The large corporations coming in and buying up. So does it slow down the transaction? Does it speed it up? Is it simpler? Is it harder when you're dealing with a corporation on the buying end?
So it definitely speeds up the transaction. So up until the last 2 years, 80% of my deals were owner operator buyers, essentially. And essentially almost all of my sales are owner operators. But the buyers, about 80%. Now it's the reverse. About 80% of my buyers are investors of some sort. That doesn't mean the large publicly traded companies. It means the new investors in the market. But those investors have much deeper pockets. Their financing is much easier. And they're much more experienced at either running businesses, maybe not necessarily campground businesses, but some sort of business. That's why they're investors. They have money, they have business experience. So it's easier to finance. So the process of closing usually is much faster. Though at the same time, they can ask for a lot more diligence. So where an owner operator, might only ask for a few things when they're buying a campground because they don't necessarily know to ask for all this other stuff, an investor will come in with 1 or 2 pages of documents that they're looking for. And, I end up gathering hundreds, if not thousands of pages of backup for them. So the process in some ways can be a lot easier. There is no emotion in that process. So that sometimes can make it easier. So you definitely know what to expect. But at the same time, they might ask you for more documentation. And if you are that organized seller that has your records in order, no problem. You pull it right out and it's not an issue. Not every campground owner has that.
Are we seeing the end of the era of mom and pop ownership?
I hope not. That's one of my fears for our industry. I think our industry will suffer long term if that is the case. At least in the Northeast, there are some campgrounds that are just too small and don't have the capabilities of growing large enough for an investor to own it. So those will always be owned by an owner-operator buyer or an owner operator. But some of the owner operator parks that do have significant expansion capabilities, those are the ones getting scooped up by the investors. And
Yeah.
the market's going to look a lot different in 5 to 10 years if this continues to be the case.
Yeah, I mean, it's just amazing, even like the small investment groups. So, like a lot of people like hear about like Sun Outdoors, RVC Outdoor Destinations, some of the larger groups, ELS. But even like the smaller ones, like at WCM just had a story on a small group of guys, 3 to 4 guys that started a little investment firm, I guess. I don't know. They're an investment group and they've bought like 3 or 4 parks in the last year and they want to buy 3 or 4 more this year. So it's just amazing how many of those are popping up. And people want to own multiple parks too. Do you have a lot of owners that come to you? They already own a campground, but they're looking to buy like a second or third campground?
I've had a few of those. Unfortunately, they haven't necessarily turned into a closed transaction. I have a lot of experience this year in new investors, smaller groups, and one in particular, he bought 8 campgrounds last year, 4 of them through me, and they were small owner-operator parks, 100-site parks. But he was new to the industry, so he wanted to focus in that niche, buying parks that had potential for expansion. He decided, I'd rather do that and then in a few years add several hundred sites versus competing with some of these big historical companies like Sun Communities, where they're coming in and paying gobs of money that he just, didn't want to. He'd rather get a little bit lower cap rate and then grow over time. There's a lot of those investors out there in the market, a lot of private equity in the market, and they're buying up the smaller mom and pop campgrounds that have acreage for expansion.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. Do you get a sense that there's a group of owners, maybe they're a little bit older, they've been in the industry for a while, and I mean, it's just time to cash out, I guess. This is a good time to sell the park and
Yes.
retire.
So last year, I think a lot of things came together to make last year, I think, one of the best years we'll ever see on the sell side. It was a hot seller's market. Interest rates were low. That pushes the value up. All of our numbers were up. That's pushing the values up. The market was hot. Lots more buyers. That's pushing the market up and our values up. The stock market pushed, that money was more readily available. So it's pushing our values up. But at the same time, the long-term capital gains tax treatment is being proposed. It's a proposed increase. Last year it was supposed to be part of the CARE Act, or Biden wanted to significantly increase it. That got shot down, but they're still talking about stripping the long-term capital gains tax treatment out of that and passing it separately. That's on for potentially this year in 2022. So we're all kind of biting our nails, like what's going to happen with that? If that goes up, even if our values go up, you might walk with less, right? So a lot of the owners that were thinking about selling in the last couple of years because of that potential change pulled the trigger last year. So we had so many listings last year, but we still had more buyers, right? So a lot of those people who were on the fence already listed last year, already sold. So now, and I've been talking to a lot of other brokers across the country, that the listings are dwindling. So it's still a seller's market because there's not a lot out there, right? But if you're looking, it's hard. It's hard to find those listings because people now are waiting to see what is going to happen with that long-term capital gains tax treatment change. Now, go ahead, Mike. Go ahead.
No, I was just going to mention, put my my camper hat on for a second, I guess, and say, what does this mean to campers? What is the new face of campground ownership and where this is heading? What's it going to mean to the guy that's pulling into the site at night?
Well, there's a lot of campers that prefer the small mom and pops. They want to walk into the office and talk to the owner. That's going to change. You're going to have the corporate owned parks, even the smaller parks. You're going to have a manager who may or may not be able to make that decision if there was, any sort of issue. They have to, get approval before they do certain things. That doesn't mean that the campgrounds aren't going to be beautiful and well cared for. Sometimes the corporations put a lot more money into it, but the biggest change that's going to happen, rates are going up. The more investors that come into the market, the higher the rates. I saw a lot of campgrounds, small mom and pops, going up $1,000 in one season on their seasonal sites. And you don't see mom and pops doing that. You see corporations, because the mom and pop owner is going to hear an earful from the camper when they say to everybody, we just raised our rates $1,000 in this for next year. The campground manager is going to be like, I didn't make the decision. Call my boss over in California or Chicago or wherever they are. It wasn't my call. And that's going to be, I think, the biggest change that campers are going to see for the corporate owned type parks. And in corporate, I use that term loosely. It can be a small investor corporation, or it can be a large publicly traded corporation. So, but I think that's going to be the biggest change that we're going to see in the next few years.
Yeah, and I think we already see that even on the non-corporate side, even the mom and pops to some degree are doing more of that. I mean, not quite to the extent of like $1,000 a year, like what you were saying, but I know dynamic pricing and everything has come into play, and just the site rates for overnight sites are going up quite a bit.
Absolutely.
It obviously depends on your region and what kind of park you have. But I think that in how that impacts the experience, I guess we'll find out. So, but yeah, the rates have definitely been going up. So
But
we'll have to
it's
see.
supply and demand, even on the
Yeah.
owner-operator smaller parks. If you have never had a wait list, and now in the last 2 years, you have a huge wait list because everybody has a wait list now, that's basic, economy 101, right?
Yep.
Supply and demand. If you have 100 people waiting for that site, you can charge more. And so I think even the mom and pops, like you said, are starting to, raise those rates. But for so many years, a lot of these mom and pops didn't raise rates, or raise them a very small amount. I mean, look at the inflation now. This year, it's going to be sky high. In the last few years, we haven't had as much inflation, but I think that's all going to have some effect in the next couple of years, and a pretty big jump on our rates.
It seems like the big unknown for a lot of years, I don't think Arvik could ever nail it down either, is everybody uses different numbers. What numbers do you use, Mia, for how many private campgrounds are actually out there in the United States? What's the number? Is it 8,000, 9,000, 10,000? You hear it all over the place. How many are there?
So I focus mostly on the Northeast. So I always there's approximately 1,000 privately owned campgrounds in the Northeast. But that number, so I consider a privately owned campground is private regardless of whether it's a corporate owner or an owner-operator owner. We haven't really seen the numbers, the split between corporate owned and owner-operators. It does matter by the state. Like, you see a lot more for example, New Jersey has got a lot more corporately owned parks than, say, Vermont, right? Because a lot of the parks in Jersey are much bigger. So it's hard to say, Mike. I mean, what I consider a privately owned campground is something that's not a state park, right? It's a RV park or campground that allows, campers to come in, whether it's a corporate owner or private owned. So I don't know if I answered your question. I'm sorry.
Well, I think you just illustrated how hard it is to know. It's like this big unknown squishy number. I know that Arvik came out with a report last week. I think they said, correct me if I'm wrong, Ben, but I think they said 81,000 new campsites are in development right now. Does the influx of new eventually affect the price of existing?
It depends on your region. So I don't believe it will have an effect, at least in the Northeast, it won't. The Northeast is very, very difficult to start anything from scratch. So you might see new campground sites, but you're not going to see a new campground. But you go in different parts of the country, like Texas, you're going to see a new 500 site campground going up like that. These huge developments. So if you get enough of those in a specific area, that might have an effect on the rates. Now, whether it's positive or negative, it depends. So generally, if you're going to have a new huge development going on, that might raise everybody's rates, because now your competitor up the street is charging that extra $1,000 a night, right? Or no, I'm sorry, a season, versus what you were historically charging. It's going to bring a lot more people into the area. Yes, it's competition, but there is so much demand for camping right now that competition isn't a bad thing. I think it does help the owner to potentially drive rates up, because if you are the lowest priced campground in your area and you did see, a couple of new developments going in and their rates are through the roof, it is going to probably drive more business to you if you keep your rates lower, but it even gives you the opportunity to raise your rates a bit.
Yeah. We still see a lot of family-owned campgrounds. Obviously, the next generation is coming up. There's quite a few people I talk with that have taken over for their parents. Do you see a lot of that coming into your office where, the parents and the siblings want to take over? What's that process like? Can it be more complicated than if they just sell the park, I guess, to non-family members?
I do a lot of consulting for succession planning. Over the last several years, a lot more than normal. The biggest issue that I think that the parents have right now is their numbers are so high, their value is so high. Sometimes they're like, this is everything that I've ever worked for, and I don't have a retirement fund, and my kids can't afford this campground, and I can't afford to give it to them. So I've been in a situation in the last few years where I've sold several campgrounds in that situation where, the kids can't afford to buy. Now the campground's worth $5, $10, $15 million. They can't afford it. And the parents have no savings, right? Everything they have is in that campground. So then they decide, look, as a family, sometimes they just decide, we're just going to sell it and we'll gift you some money now. This is your retirement also, and your inheritance also, but we need money to live on, and we don't want to work until we're 90 years old. So we do see that. But in other situations, when they can keep it in the family, it's crucial to sit down with an estate planning lawyer and your CPA to come up with a proper succession plan, because there are ways that you can gift or sell that are more that have a better tax advantage to you than if you just outright sold it. So you need to do some planning if you are going to keep it in the family. And there are a lot of creative ways that you can do that with the next generation or generation skipping for your grandkids, et cetera, to make sure that it stays within the family.
This may be a question you can't answer, but do you think there are some owners out there that were planning on passing it along, and then the last couple of years kind of changed their mind with the values going up?
Absolutely. I've sold several of them in the last 2 years where they're like, we were going to give it to the kids, but we can't. This is a huge number. We're just going to cut them a check for $1 million instead and let them go and do whatever they want, whether it's a campground or not. And it's shocking how much values have gone up in the last few years. Shocking to me, shocking to, I'm sure, you guys, and definitely shocking to a lot of the owners.
Yeah.
So when they see that number, they're like, I can't. And usually in that situation, often the kids understand. Not every situation. I knew in one situation, the son who was 25 years old was desperate to buy it, but how's he going to buy a $12 million campground at 25?
I'm telling you what, if my parents write me $1 million check, that'll make the pain go away a little bit easier. It's not quite as rough.
So Mia,
Yeah,
what is outfits like Harvest Host and those folks that Tinter that just have a couple of sites out in the back 40? Uh, they're sort of operating like a campground, but they're sort of not. Are
right.
those eventually going to be wrapped into more legislation or more restrictions, or are they going to be campgrounds eventually?
I hope they do that. I've been saying for years that what they're doing is illegal. They're operating a campground without the proper licensing. All of my other campground owner operators, whether you're a larger corporation or a small 50 site campground, go through extensive licensing,
Mhm.
public water source, inspections, etc., to be able to operate a campground. You can't just offer a few sites in your backyard and throw it up on whatever. And then there's absolutely no regulation whatsoever. It's wrong, and I hope the states come down on it. Um, I've been seeing this for the few years. We've talked about it a lot of these campground shows and seminars, etc. And I just hope that the states will catch up and start to regulate this. At least again in the Northeast, we are highly regulated. There are some states where you have to have literally the state of Rhode Island. It's like 15 to 20 permits and licenses to open your door.
Yeah.
Everything you can possibly think of to be able to open and operate a campground, whether it's tent sites or rentals or whatever. And then the guy up the street who's got 50 acres can just throw a few sites in his backyard and nothing, no regulation at all. That's not right.
What's interesting on our end at WCM is, we've seen a little bit of legislation, like what you're speaking about in certain areas. And then what's interesting, there's at least one California county, and there's a couple other counties I know of that have actually taken the different route. And I think the one California county is getting really close to actually creating an ordinance to allow like hip camp type sites and different things, which is kind of surprising that you would go that route. So that's kind of interesting too on that front. So
But then what do they do with
I
things like
yeah
water and sewer?
I,
There's
yeah
no oversight whatsoever. It's
yeah
shocking to me
yeah
they would allow that.
yeah. So um, it's definitely something that's interesting when you talk to the RVing community. They have no problem with it, obviously, because they want somewhere to park their rig
I
in,
I get
but it is a huge issue for campground operators, and that, and kind of the public sector too, I think, is becoming more of an issue, especially with like the Great American Outdoors Act and some of the extra money that's flowing into public parks now, and the competition. I guess there are definitely parks that benefit from public parks, but there are definitely some competition issues as far as public parks expanding and adding more amenities and different things. So that's kind of interesting. So
But at least the public parks are regulated.
yeah, yep,
When you
yeah,
turn the water spigot on, somebody's tested it.
yep,
And so the camper should be concerned with the RVer should be concerned about those backyard operations, because when they go there, how do they know it's that they're protected? If something bad happens, they're not going to be so happy about it. And then even insurance. Do you have proper insurance on the property if something bad does happen?
yeah,
That RVer should be concerned with some of those issues. And the big one that always jumps up is water, because that's key. You can't operate if you don't have septic. They'll have to go and dump somewhere else. But what if they just open it up and dump on your land? I don't know. I mean, I'm not sure what type of regulations are in place for that. None at this point. Well, I shouldn't say that. There are regulations for other campgrounds, but they need to apply them in all situations.
yeah, yeah. So I mean, it is a rough issue. I know we've had like Harvest Toast on here and different things. So I mean, Hip Camp pops up all the time in the news. So it's definitely interesting. So But I guess Mike, did you have any other questions?
I think we racked through it really quickly, Mia, and thanks so much for the information today. I think this is really valuable to anybody that owns a campground, especially to your core clients, those mom and pops out there that find themselves in a different place than they thought they were going to 10 years ago.
Yeah.
Yeah, and you guys all, the broker community, like you said, works together pretty well. Even if you're not in a Northeast state, which that's pretty much your focus, right? Is in the
My focus
Northeast.
is, but I've
Yep.
often helped people outside of my region, especially if somebody comes to them with an unsolicited offer. At least tell them, no, don't take the offer. Go and find somebody to help you sell it and get several offers. And
So Mia, how do people know where you're going to be speaking next? You mentioned that you talk at a few shows and you do some seminars. Do you have a schedule of those, or do you have something coming up?
Yeah, at the NCA, which is the Northeast Campground Owners Association. That's in Southbridge, Mass. It's mid-March. Let me look at my calendar. It's on the 17th, 18th, and 19th. And I actually have two. I have a buyer's seminar. That's a whole day. I will be one of the speakers, and there's several other speakers on the 17th at the buyer's seminar. And then on the 18th, I'll be speaking as well on increasing values at campgrounds. And then I'll also be speaking in the Maine Campground Owners Association on April 1st, I believe. That's Friday, April 1st, up in Auburn, Maine. Those are the two that are coming up soon.
Well, you'll be down in Orlando with me.
I will be down in Orlando.
Week.
Yes.
So
at the Mid-Atlantic States Show. That's Jersey, Maryland, Delaware, Virginia. That'll be next week.
Yep. Yeah, and I looked at the weather, and it's going to be 74 on Monday and 78 on Tuesday and sunny.
Oh, take your sweaters.
So it's going to be great weather, at least right now.
Did you say take your sweaters, Mike?
Oh, I don't know if I could tolerate anything under 80 anymore.
It's snowing right now. Mike's in Hawaii.
Not so much here.
I've got a little envy right now.
So, well, thank you, Maya, for coming on. And I mean, Mia, thank you, Mia, for coming on and joining us. And I look forward to seeing you next week in Orlando in person. And thanks everyone for watching. And Mike, have a great rest of the week in Hawaii.
Always
Thank
do.
you guys. Take care.
Bye.
Bye-bye.